Welcome to Fatima. Today I'm John Veneri, editor of Catholic Family News, filling in for your regular host, Father Nicholas Gruner. This is part of a series of programs that we've been doing with Colleen Hammond, our special guest, on her book, Dressing with Dignity, but also many other related issues such as modesty, such as motherhood, such as femininity, such as family. And we're going to pick up, starting a little more about modesty and some of the experiences you've had being called out on the road or called out in interviews on the topic of modesty and some of the things that you've run into. The point we want to make, one of the points we want to make, of course, is that modesty is not an old-fashioned issue. It's something that's relevant, it's something that's important, it's something that's needed, and it's people from some of the strangest places, you would think were the strangest places, will admit that they want more modesty. I understand you did something at a high school one time that bears this out.
Oh, absolutely. I was called in by a bishop to do a conference for the girls. And they had just an all-day long conference for the girls in one of the buildings. So from all over the diocese, all the girls congregated in this one school. Well, at the same time, they were doing a conference for young men, which is being held at a different location. So I was in charge of doing the retreat and this conference for the young ladies. So all during the day, we discussed certain issues of things that were important, but I kept getting from these young girls that, oh, we don't want to be modest, because they had this negative connotation of what they felt modesty was.
Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah, it's just a frumpy type of thing,
Yeah.
which is what we've discussed in other programs. Is not what the whole idea is, and we're not going to repeat that here. But the whole idea, and I said, so look at it, reframe it. Let's have a sea change here. Let's talk about just becoming more feminine. Well, that was even worse for them. The whole concept of femininity is not something that they wanted to deal with. They said, oh, we don't want to be feminine, because in our culture we've associated femininity with weakness, with unintelligence, with fruity, lightheaded, ditziness, and they just had a total different, a skewed idea of what femininity really was. So then I had to take them through the whole idea of what is femininity. It's not wearing pink, it's not wearing ruffles, it's not ribbons and bows, it's not giggling and looking through teen magazines, and so to really embrace the whole idea of femininity. Well, then, they even though we were there all day, they really didn't grasp the idea, but some of them have written me now years later and say they're starting to understand. But during lunch, we took a break for lunch, and the girls were going to do a holy hour, and they were asked to write a little note to the boys of their ideas of what they thought about culture, about school, about boys and girls and that type of thing. So during lunch, I went over to the boys' conference, and I did a short talk to the young men about, a little bit about modesty, a little bit about what it meant to be a man. And really, it's not about being a spectacular athlete or having all the muscles, or what it really meant to be a man, a protector, a provider in our culture. And I said, now I want you to write a little note to the girls of, what your concept is. Just tell them what you want them to know. So on the drive back, there was about 120 boys, but we'll just first, percentage sake, we'll say it was about 100. I sorted through all of their little one-liners, because boys get right to the point, It was interesting because when the girls' letters went over to the boys, they were about 5 pages long, because they wrote and wrote and wrote. But it was interesting that they fell into 2 distinct categories. About 70% of the boys had one thing to say, and about 30% of the boys had something else. So I thought, it was very interesting. We got back to the girls, and I said, I want to read to you what the boys said. And I said, this is all anonymous. We don't know who wrote what, but let me just read this to you. So I started going through this chunk of 70 one-liners. Please dress more modestly. We want to respect you as a person. We don't want to look at you as an object. And the girls melted. Oh, that's so wonderful. And they wanted to know who wrote it. And I said, well, I told you it's anonymous. We don't know. And they said, oh, let's see, because we can tell by the handwriting who wrote it. And I said, no. And they said, oh, well, you know what? Bobby probably wrote that. Oh, he's so sweet. He's such a nice young man. And so I would read another one, about, we really want you to, hold us to a higher standard. And the girls melted. Oh, I bet you, Ronnie probably wrote that one. And they were trying to guess who it was that wrote these spectacular things. So I went through a couple of dozen of the different notes, and they kind of generally went in that direction. Please dress more modestly. Please, be stronger in virtue. Hold us to a higher standard. We count on you for that. And they said, oh, we're so lucky to have these young men in our school. And I said, I'm not done. There's another group over here of letters that I want you to hear. And so I started to read, and I can't repeat, it was so vile, the things that were in these notes, John. It was, show more cleavage. We want to see more of this. We want this. And some of them even gave me little, nasty pictures. They drew little pictures to go along with it. So I read some of the less vile ones to the girls. And they were disgusted. They went, ew, oh, I bet you I know who wrote that. And they started guessing some of the boys that they were very much did not like. And I said, you just proved an interesting point. The boys that you don't like are the ones that are attracted to you when you dress immodestly. And the boys that you want to become associated with, that you want to date, the boys that you want to be friends with, are the ones that are calling upon you to dress more modestly, to hold them to a higher standard, and to grow in virtue. I said, so what have you learned? And it goes back to what we talked about before, how quickly you make a first impression, and how those first impressions are lasting based on how you dress, based on the clothing that they're wearing. So it was a very powerful, very small, cross sample of society, but a very popular or a very important lesson that these young women learned.
Well, I'm sure it was a lesson that surprised them too. I mean, clearly, if they knew that ahead of time, they wouldn't be dressing the way they were, and they needed this empirical evidence, as it were, to show them, that modesty is attractive, much more attractive. Didn't you have a quote one time about, I think it was written in the 19th century, of someone who said that when a woman thinks herself unintelligent, or I can't recite it.
It was actually written in 1852. And it was a man who said, when a young lady doesn't feel that she has enough intelligence, character, or personality to offer a man, to attract a man to her, she'll dress immodestly because she knows that'll work.
That's the only thing that'll work for her.
That's the only thing that'll work for her.
That's what she thinks anyway.
Right, right. Yeah. But again, it goes back to, do you want to attract the young man who really wants you to be an object, or do you want to attract a man of character to you? And so obviously if these girls, if they recognize something like this 160 years ago, that when you don't feel that you are secure enough in yourself to attract a man of character to you, you're going to try anything you can to get a man. And now in our society, I mean, it's what they call hooker chic. It's what women were wearing on street corners in red light districts in bad parts of town in the 50s, 50 or 60 years ago. We now see at mass.
By 12-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 10-year-olds.
Right.
The whole tween market.
Well, and it's even moved further down than that. Yeah. It's become, there was just a study that was released that 30% of toddler clothes, so we're looking at 2 to 6-year-old young children, 30% of those that clothing is sexualized. So we have 6-year-olds, 4-year-olds dressing in bikinis.
That are padded.
That are padded.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I saw that, in fact, yes.
Yes, so 30%. Already, and we're teaching our culture and our society to look objective, look at women as objects.
It's funny too, because I heard you tell the story. The MTV network in the United States is the main purveyor of this this pop culture, the Madonnas, the Britney Spears, the Lady Gagas, all these vile creatures, and yet you had an encounter with. With an MTV, what was he? A
radio jockey.
A radio jockey that actually confirmed the thesis of your book.
Yeah, it was kind of funny because I got home from someplace and my husband said, "You'll never believe who called and wants to interview you." And I said, "Oh, who?" I was thinking of, people that I would really think would be, conservative names that would really be drawn to interviewing me and want to promote my book. He said, "MTV." I said, "Are you sure?" He said, "That's what it came up on the caller ID. That's the phone number they left. I've already called and checked it." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to do that. They're only going to mock me. They only want to make fun of me and the book and the whole idea of the Catholic Church."
Well, that's what I would expect.
Yeah, and that's what MTV seems to be about, is the antithesis of anything that I'm trying to promote. And he said, "Well, what if one young lady that hears you interviewed changes. Wouldn't that be worth it? Are you willing to be a fool for Christ? I went, oh, busted. I guess I have to do it now. So I said, okay. So I called him back. And sure enough, just as I expected, some of the first questions were all giggly, what are you trying to, so what is it, this book, this Dressing with Dignity? What are you trying to get across? And I thought, well, I need to speak their language and speak to them where they're at in the culture.
Words of one syllable each.
Yeah, small words, single syllable words, keep it basic. And I said, it's just women want to be taken seriously, but the first thing they do is flash their skin at you. And they went, huh. And I said, well, think of it this way. And I started explaining things to them and the things that they're experiencing in their life. And they went, wow, that's like so true, And so so then they started speaking. So initially they did bring me on to kind of make fun of it, but then they started seeing the common sense that's associated with really what Holy Mother Church teaches. And they said, he started telling me stories. He said, what you're saying is very true, that men, by their very nature, are more interested in the procreation of this, the advancement of the species. And he said, because when I go out on these live events that we do, women will come up to me and they're hardly wearing anything. And he said, it's hard for me not to look. It's like we had spoken about before, about when you pass this horrible car accident and there's bodies all over the place and blood, and you're drawn to look at something like that. It's just so horrific, you stare. Well, for men, when there's a lot of skin, they're just very drawn to look. And he said, so for me, it's hard because I can't look, because then they'll say, what are you doing looking at my body, which they have on display for everybody to see. He said, so I just have to stare them in the face and say, look at me, look at her eyes, look at her eyes, look at her eyes, look at her eyes. And I never hear a word she says. So, and man after man after man after man has told me the same thing. When they're around a modestly dressed woman, they're comfortable, they're at ease, they're relaxed, they can engage in a conversation, they can get to know them as a person and not be so distracted by everything else that's going on of what they're not wearing and that type of thing, that they really feel that they can truly be respectful of her as a person and as a woman and not think of her as a sexual object. So it came from MTV. I mean, they just confirmed everything I was trying to say in the book, that when you treat and what this man who wrote in 1852, if you have enough character and personality and intelligence to offer in a conversation to develop a friendship and potentially go further than that, then you don't have to subject anybody or bring yourself down to these other baser ways of
Well, it's interesting because, years ago, I don't know if I can use a word like this on television, but well, at least a program like this. But years ago, what you're talking about was what was called the classic Bimbo. The girl who was obviously very stupid, not very intelligent, didn't have much, but she had this figure that worked for her, and so she just flaunted it. And she's always a comic figure. Mm-hmm. She's always a comic figure because she's pathetic.
It is sad. It's sad.
She's pathetic, and that's why she's a comic figure.
Right.
And so this is where we've gone to in the culture in general, that the making pathetic to be the social norm.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it ties into many things in our culture where they're bringing us back down to almost, an animal level. I had a priest explain to me once, he goes, animals, you put the food in for an animal, for a dog, you'll put their food in a bowl on the floor. And so an animal will go down and eat their food. As human beings, we sit at a table and we're very cultured and we're above an animal. We bring food up to us.
Yes.
And then one step beyond that, as Catholics, we kneel and receive the Holy Eucharist as the gift, bread that comes down from heaven. And so we receive, the Eucharist coming down to us. So why do we want to bring ourselves down to an animal level? Because we are above that. And that was the whole idea of King Louis IX. He said we are above animals. We dress nicer. We eat finer foods. We engage in culture. We have a cultural identity about us. And he tried to instill that. The whole idea of knowing how to dance was an important thing. Mm-hmm. To have, to how to ballroom dance, which has evolved into now. They didn't have ballroom dancing then. But a man of culture in order to win a woman. See, it always used to be the other way around. Men were trying to win women. Well, now women are on the corners. You can get whatever you want. Interesting story. I met a man, and he had just gotten out of jail. He'd been in jail for 20 years, so obviously he did something horrible. But the 20 years that he was totally away from society, he came out and he said, now this is a man who obviously, coming out of jail, did something horrible, you know. He said, what happened to women? They're all hookers. He said, women today now are all prostitutes. He said, I went to the bar to have a drink, and I had women offering themselves to me all night long. And he said, what kind of bar am I at? He thought he was in the wrong side of, you know, the wrong part of town. This is a man who's never seen a cell phone. You know, didn't know anything about the internet. You know, in the 20 years that he was gone, it was just last year, he said, women are prostitutes. They're all out, you know, to offer anything for free. He said, when I went into jail, he was 21 years old when he went into jail. He said, we used to work hard to impress a woman so we could get her to go out on a date with us. Now women are just throwing themselves at men. And it's just it's just intrinsically disordered.
Well, a lot of it comes down to what you said about reducing to the level of the animal. Because the animal operates strictly on the senses, not on the intellect, not on the will. And so the dog sees the food, the dog goes after it. I see it, I want it, and it's just an automatic reflex with an animal. Mm-hmm. It just goes, there's no intellect involved.
Right.
You just follow your senses, you follow your appetites, and you take what you want. And this is the level we've come to now, in that we have abandoned the intellect, we've abandoned the will, we've abandoned any idea of virtue, and it's simply what I want, I got the appetite for it, I'm going to grab it. And this is male and female right now. And so there's a big job for people to do in not only education, but in the home. And, you know, teaching children to be virtuous and keeping them from this pop culture somewhat. I mean, there's a lot we could say about that. I mean, that's the whole pop culture right now is designed, I use the word designed, to really bring us down lower. Bring us down lower. We were talking about this awful creature, Lady Gaga came up. And I bring her up because what people don't realize about the music industry is the fact that it is an industry. And because it's an industry, it means it has to keep selling the products. And in order to sell the products, you have to, you give the youngster something outrageous, and they take it for a while, and then they become immune to it. So then you need another outrage, and the way they do it is rather than going up, they go down with more sensuousness, more vileness, more blasphemy. And this is, you know, one of the many reasons why I know you've done it, I'm doing it as a parent, withdrawing the children from the pop culture, because we become like the company we keep. And the old adages used to be, you know, you have to seek good companions. But even in Catholic schools, we're not getting that anymore. That's why so many of us are homeschooling. Right.
Absolutely. And even when we do as much as we can to remove them from the culture and protect them from the culture,
oh, it gets in.
It gets in. I mean, you can't go to the store anymore. Anytime you walk into a store, there's televisions all over. They're blaring the music, the sound, the images, and.
Well, I think it was Monsignor Smith. He said that you could go to, say, the Hudson River, and you can jump in, or you could stand on the bank of the Hudson River in heavy mist, and you'll become in time just as soaking wet as if you jumped in. So the point is to stay away from the river,
right,
you know, as much as you can. But some of it does get in.
Yes, and learn to swim. You know, and that's what we teach our children. We stay on the edge and observe and teach. You know, why are they doing this? Starting, you know, very Socratic, asking questions. What would happen in this case? What would happen in that? And standing back and observing the culture and teaching them to deal with it. Because people say that, you know, oh, as soon as they get 18, they're going to be immersed in it, and then you're going to lose them. But the idea is to protect them from it, expose them to it, and teach them how to battle it.
Yeah, I've heard it. I've heard one of a good point of parenting is in this way is it's called the Hothouse Method, and it's like a plant. You have the child in it a little bit and then pull back, and a little bit more and pull back. But always, you know, we're the ones with the responsibility. And because, as our dear friend Dr. Waters teaches, because we have the responsibility, it's not that we have rights and we also have responsibilities. We have the responsibility as parents. That is what gives us the right over our children to be the final arbiter of this is what is good for you, this is what is bad for you. Not the state, not the United Nations, not even the local dioceses with their awful sex ed programs. You know, and so it's a big job we have as far as countering the culture.
Right. But ultimately, we're culpable. You know, and I think people miss out on that. A lot of parents that I speak to, well, you know, what can I do? I mean, all the teenagers are doing it. And no, we draw the line. Again, it's do we want our children to grow up and be virtuous and have character, or do we want them just to be popular and have a lot of friends? And anymore, it's gone down to those base passions, those base appetites, where it's just, no, we have to fit in, we have to do this, we have to do that. And I had a priest friend of mine said, if these aren't the end times, it's certainly a dress rehearsal.
Yes, because I don't want to be around when the real one happens.
No, you know, there's so many horrible things that are happening, and we have to pull away from it and say, you know, do we have the fortitude and the character to do the right thing no matter what? I mean, there were saints that died because they wouldn't put a pinch of incense, you know, to burn to a god. And I wonder how many of us are that firm in our faith that we wouldn't do that, because we seem to have let go in so many other areas that we're not willing to stand firm. And our children, our innocent children, they're first and foremost the ones we ought to be protecting. You know, and like we've said before, it goes beyond modesty. You know, that seems to be one of the areas that if we pull in on that area, even if we can start first, you know, even if you don't believe it in your heart, once you first start to act that way, those types of things will eventually become part of who you are.
Well, it requires ourselves as parents and also our children being true to what we know to be true and living it. I'm a great fan of Calvin and Hobbes. And one of my favorite panels of Calvin and Hobbes is Calvin is wearing this very trendy t-shirt. And he says, I express my individuality by being just like everyone else.
Right.
And this is the battle that we're always fighting. The fact that as Catholics and as people just who are willing to follow the natural law, it's going to put us in a head-on collision with the pop culture.
And it just becomes a habit. It's like any virtue. You know, at first it's hard. You do it for 21 days, it becomes a habit. And I know for women, as far as, you know, again, back to the modesty issue, all winter long, we're all bundled up. We're used to wearing a lot of clothes. And I remember, you know, when I wrote the book, I didn't even own a dress. You know, my idea of femininity was the same as the culture. It was a bad thing. I didn't want to be weak. I didn't want to be feminine. But you know, then you get to the winter time. You're all bundled up all winter long, and then boy, it comes time this springtime, you know, and then we have to get ready for bathing suits. Oh, we got to get ready to go to the beach. But the very first time you put a bathing suit on and go out the door, you feel naked. And you feel like you always, but by the end of summer, you're used to it. It's no big deal. And so it's like the frog in the boiling water, you know. You put a frog in warm water and slowly turn up the heat, it'll boil to death.
Well, you're touching on two things that you deal with in the book about the way we get used to things. We are used to seeing people in bathing suits. We're used to seeing people in bikinis. But when the bikini first came out, it created a bit of an uproar amongst the models. Am I correct?
Oh, absolutely. The models refused it. You know, when they first introduced a bikini, they actually named it a bikini because I guess that was the nuclear test site. It was going to be such a big, you know, explosion and big deal in the fashion world. So when they introduced the bikini, they tried to get these models to wear it, and they refused. They said, I'm not a hooker. I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't walk out down with those tiny little patches covering my, no, I won't do that. They had to hire prostitutes.
It's not funny.
They were, you know, they were the only ones that were willing, you know, and
go down a
dancers.
runway
And even in some of the 50s and the 60s, when a lot of these beach movies came out, and Annette Funicello, and she refused to wear a two-piece.
She was always in a one-piece.
It was in her contract and was in someone else's contract as well. A one-piece bathing suit only.
Yeah. Now they're down to just a strap.
Yeah.
A string.
One.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Not even two.
Yeah. Well, it shows. I mean, it shows how important your work is to get these basic issues of modesty and common sense, and reminding us of our basic natures of men and women, to get it back in the public eye. because the news media, the entertainment media is giving us the opposite, the complete opposite message.
Right. And when you go back to that interview I had with MTV, the men deep down inside recognize the issue. They know.
Yeah.
So our big goal is going and teaching the women what the men really already know, and having the women be respectful enough of the men in our lives to be willing to dress a little more dignified and treat ourselves with more dignity. If we want to be treated with respect, we have to treat ourselves with respect first, and then take it where the men already know that it is. Even up at the MTV level, they already know.
They already know. Thank you, Colleen. This closes this program. I'm John Veneri, filling in for Father Gruner, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Filia